How does the government evaluate offers in compromise? That's a good question. So the government evaluates offers and compromises based on what a taxpayer's reasonable collection potential is. So remember, an offer in compromise is an agreement between the taxpayer and the government to forgive a past tax liability in exchange for future compliance. The government isn't just going to forget about the liability. The government wants to make sure that the offer it's getting from the taxpayer is fair to the government. So the government uses a formula called reasonable collection potential to determine that formula. And the way reasonable collection potential works is the government looks at the taxpayer's current situation. It projects a period of time. Between the state and federal government, they do it slightly differently. But the question essentially is, okay, John's taxpayer is submitting an offer in compromise. How much could we reasonably collect from John over the next 5 years? And is that amount equal or lower than what John's offer in compromise is? So you see how that works? They're taking a 5-year period. They're saying, how much can we get out of the guy? And if that amount is equal to or less than the amount of the offer, then the government is inclined to take the offer. So reasonable collection potential breaks down like this. Reasonable collection potential, RCP, is equal to the quick sale value of any assets that the taxpayer has, plus income minus expenses over that period of time. So starting with the asset part of it, they'll take all the taxpayer's asset and they'll say, if the taxpayer were to liquidate their assets, that's what quick sale value is. It's what is the liquidation value of all the taxpayer's assets as of today. Then they'll take that number, okay, whatever that number is. And then you add that to what's the variance between the income and expenses, reasonable living expenses for the taxpayer, over the next 5 years, 60 months. So if the difference between the taxpayer's income and expenses is $100 over 60 months, $6,000. If it's $500 over 60 months, that's $30,000. So as you can see, the reason a lot of offer and compromise get rejected, number one, the taxpayer has sufficient assets, which are way above what the taxpayer is offering. But number two, it's the difference between the income and expenses on that side of things. So that's the calculation that the government's running. And actually, if you go through the offer and compromise process, when the government comes back to you and either accepts your offer, presents a counter offer, or rejects it, they have these little tables that they use. And they break down all your assets on a table, and they break down the income that you have on a table and the expenses you have on a table. So when we do an offer and compromise and we're negotiating, we're looking at those tables to see how the government is calculating what the reasonable collection potential is. So that, in a nutshell, is how offers and compromise are evaluated. And depending on the variables that you put into that formula, you'll get different results.